To the people who are empaths, to the people who are highly sensitives, INFJs, neurodivergent, intuitives, FE, cognitive function, anything that is empath-esque, and you have a tendency to introspect for your entire life, this message is for you. I'm hearing a lot of messages from people in the spiritual community, as well as like people who are professional psychologists, and they it feels like they like to try and give a message of, think about what other people went through. You hear these messages if you're a seeker, if you're a spiritual person, if you're mystic, if you're a starseed, if you're anything like that. I'm pretty sure that you've kind of come across that kind of a message. Consider what the other person must have went through. Think about what your mom and dad, how they might have been abused. Think about your ancestors. Here's the thing. While that message is valid for somebody like myself who reluctantly identifies it, I don't identify as an empath. The shoe just fits the bill. I personally feel like being an empath is an exploitation of sensitivities that you're naturally born with, in a lot of cases. Not in all the cases, but in a lot of cases. And that was the case with me. I'm naturally born with certain sensitivities. I identify as a highly sensitive person, and I got other things going on. And I feel like that sensitivity was exploited and it turned into the empath role, the empath bit. That means that in the CPTSD that I experienced, I was always considering what somebody else was going through, how somebody else must have been affected, what happened with my grandmother, what happened with my great-grandmother, what happened to my dad, what happened with my great-granddad, what happened with, or, oh, they must have just had it so bad, so I don't have any reason to complain. I don't have, I need to just have more compassion. That was the call. Have more compassion. Think about what they went through. Have more compassion. Don't be a victim. Listen, be the victim. That is terrible advice, but if you've ever heard those kind of messages and they struck you the wrong way, it's because that kind of message is not medicine for the empath. That is a poison for the empath. When you hear messages that tell you to consider what the other person went through, I am telling you, I'm nobody, but hey, if you resonate, you resonate. I'm telling you, do not listen to that message. That message in particular for the empath, for the sensitive, for the person that is already has a tendency to over empathize, has a tendency to self-abandon, and also has a tendency to automatically, as a result of their over empathy, they have a tendency to reflexively excuse harm that is being done to them. When you hear messages that tell you to consider what the other person must be going through, how they must feel, this is not a new occurrence for you. I know that there's a lot lost in translation when we're communicating, and especially like on the internet when people, all kind of people have all kinds of messages, and I'm not saying that it's not valid. This is just a PSA for the people that resonate with me as empaths. That is not your message. That is not your message. That is not your medicine. That is a poison. Your job is to focus on yourself. Where you have been focused on other people and considering how other people feel, your job is to tune into yourself, your body, and learn how you feel. Now, you're going to have how everybody else in the room is feeling, screaming at you, but now your job is to be so attuned to yourself that you really don't even hear it. So that means whenever you come across messages where the respected spiritual teacher, leader, psychologist, authority person is kind of giving a message of consideration for the person that caused harm, or the generational abuse or trauma or toxicity, whatever the case may be, I'm just saying that one's not for you. Turn it off. It is for, because if you're like me, you might be thinking like, you're trying to get it all. You're trying to do it all. You're trying to be super excellent, perfect. You're trying to do everything that you need to do to heal, right? We have a different journey. We have a different path. I think that for people like myself, the journey is down into the body. It is into the body. Get into the body. What do you feel? How do you feel? How does that impact you? What might you be going through? Because if you're anything like me, I bet you had a hard time knowing that. Well, I am coming around to learning how to listen to myself and recognizing when myself doesn't like what's going on and how something upsets me, how something grieves me, how something makes me sad, how something, makes me feel confused, whatever the case may be. I am now at this later stage in life becoming more aware of how I feel, but that is because earlier in my life I had a tendency to over empathize with the other person's experience to my own detriment. I didn't know when I was hungry. I didn't know when I had to go to the restroom. I didn't know when I was sleepy. I didn't know. I didn't know when I was in pain. I didn't know when my body hurt. I didn't know when my back was hurting, my feet were hurting, my legs were tight. I didn't know because I was just that. I think that's called interoception or something like that. Like the ability to be able to sense what's going on inside your body when you're disconnected from your body. I think I did a video about that before. When you're disconnected from your body, you don't know. 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 And that being disconnected from my body had an entire chain reaction. That is why a message like that from spiritual leaders, teachers, psychologists, people in positions of authority who are well respected and have a good message, how that message can go sideways for somebody like you, for the empath. I'm telling you that because you will find yourself in those circles where these authorities and these leaders and teachers are speaking, and a lot of times they're addressing people that haven't even thought like that. They're addressing people, and for you and I, that's unthinkable. You don't even know what life is like to not think about what somebody else is going through. So you're like, oh, I guess I need to think harder about what they're going through. But no, they're talking to people who maybe their perception is more surface level, or whose feeling is already oriented internally first. So they're less in touch with what other people are experiencing. I feel that in this life, some people's journey is to ascend from the bottom up. They're already firmly seated in their body. They know what they feel, right? But their journey is kind of like transcendence above the body. And I feel like people who are already intuitive, heavy in the third eye, too much, as they say, too much in the third eye and not grounded enough in the body. The journey is to descend down into the body, to bring all of that information that you have in the third eye, in the intuition, in the ethers that you have access to, bring that down into the body. That's our job, to get grounded. That's the empaths, that's the sensitives, that's anybody that resonates with those kinds of labels. You are not to consider the other person. Your job, I'm not saying, well, no, I was going to say I'm not saying to be ruthless and be an asshole, because I might be saying be an asshole. But I had a discussion with a friend about being an asshole the other day, and she feels like what I'm describing is not being an asshole. It's just having self-respect and taking care of yourself. So I'm not saying, or you might have fear of becoming an asshole. You might have fear of becoming a mean person, but your job is not to be nice. We're not here to be nice. Kindness, yes. Nice, no. Nice gets you run over. Nice gets you taken advantage of. Nice gets you to disregard yourself, disconnect from yourself, dissociate from your body and from your own experience. That is the opposite direction of your spiritual journey. Your spiritual journey is to descend down into the body. It is very feminine. It is very grounding. And this consideration of others is a very upward type of journey. We're already upward. We need to go downward. If you catch my drift, I'm using this upward downward thing because I guess I'm kind of like referencing the chakras. If you know anything about the chakras, or I'm not sure what's the correct way to pronounce that, but I'm referencing the chakras in my mind. So when I say up and down, or also the scale of consciousness. So all of those things kind of coincide, but. That's just something that I wanted to say. It really gets my goat every time I hear a message like that. Every time I know better now. It's just, I think, here's what happens. And I hope that I have said something that sounds cohesive here. But I have done a lot of healing. I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of journaling, a lot of I've made a lot of progress along my journey. And I've had to cut a lot of ties. I've had to separate myself from a lot of things, a lot of situations, a lot of places, certain social groups that I was connected to. I had to separate myself from those things in order to move forward. I've had to do all those things. And what that has left me is kind of without a community. I mean, cat's out of the bag, okay? I used to be a Christian. I don't have anything against Christianity. I mean, I have bones to pick, but I'm not anti-Christian. But I used to be a Christian, big Christian. I have a degree in theological studies, so on and so forth. So my thing, I only say that to say that when I was a Christian, I had a community of people who thought like me. You know what I'm saying? And once I had to kind of like shed a lot of these situations, places, people, groups, communities, environments, once I had to shed a lot of those things, it kind of left me just out by myself. I mean, and it did leave me with the internet, obviously. So, if you're like me, you've had a similar experience. And the therapy scene is not really, it's not really equipped to walk somebody such as yourself through a thing such as the kinds of things that you and I are trying to do. The mystic, the shaman, the sage, the healer, the seeker. It's not really designed to walk you through that. So, if you're like me, like I've been saying, you have found yourself kind of just out here by yourself looking for community on the internet. That leaves you listening to a lot of different people on the internet, which for me is perfect. Just because of the way that my mind works, it's okay. But this is a pitfall that I'm pointing out. This is a pitfall because nobody is specifically giving a caveat. Nobody is giving a disclaimer. They just go right in. They don't give a message and say, if you have severe trauma, this message isn't for you. This is just, they don't do that. They don't do that. So this is me kind of like cutting in with a PSA on a bullhorn saying that message is not for you. If they're talking about considering somebody else, what must somebody else might have been feeling, that message is not for you. So, and I guess I mean I do have some anger, but not anger as in the sense of I'm wagging my finger at these people and these leaders and teachers. I'm not doing that. Anger is, as I've heard it say, anger is information. And it's just kind of, the anger is coming from the violation of having been violated and not having somebody say, hey, that wasn't right. And not having a voice out there to kind of affirm, hey, that wasn't right. And let's establish a self for you. Let's establish a selfhood for you. Let's establish a healthy core sense of self for you. Not having that, it messages like that are harmful. So I want to say directly to the empath, to the sensitive, to the consider everyone else, or to the people pleaser, which I hate in my Grinch voice, hate that term, people pleaser. What book was that I read? It's called Fawning by Dr. Ingrid Clayton. I think that's the name of the book, but she talks about the same thing. She talks about her disdain for the phrase people pleasing. Now, if you don't have CPTSD, people pleasing might be okay for you. But if you have CPTSD and you tend to lean toward the fawn response, people pleasing just feels like an insult. It really just feels like an insult, and a bitch just can't catch a break. That's really how it feels. So anyway, but hey, if you don't mind that word, this is also for you. People pleaser, empath, sensitive, anybody that falls under that umbrella. This is your message. You are allowed to stop contextualizing harm. You don't have to put it in context. If you feel harm coming upon you, because that's what your practices are for, getting into your body. If you feel harm coming upon, you don't have to contextualize it. You don't have to understand why somebody's doing it. You don't have to continue to translate somebody's behavior. You can stop carrying the emotional load for the room. You don't have to do it. You don't have to walk right in and understand why they're doing this and why they're doing that, why this person's behavior, why they have an attitude, why they're toxic. Get the fuck out. Get out. Get away. Get them away from you. Now, somebody else that's in a different place in their journey might disagree with that because they're in a different place. I'm stepping in as kind of like the mother, and I'm walking us through stages of development that I think this is something that I've recognized too. Like, I feel like my intellect takes me into places of more expanded consciousness than my development is ready for, I guess. And that's not my fault. It just is what it is, and I'm calling attention to it. You might be that way too, especially if you're like, you are a mystic by nature. You're probably going to be into some heavy stuff. And if you have experienced trauma, there's a huge disparity in your level of development in contrast to your ability to understand the depth of reality, if that makes any sense. So, and I'm talking about like non-duality and transcendence, and the ego is an illusion and the separate self, and all that stuff is true. All of that stuff is true, but it has a place. It has a place, and it has an appropriate time to be applied. If you're already deeply empathic, your evolution, it doesn't come from understanding others better. It comes from taking yourself seriously. That's your evolution. Take yourself seriously. Okay, just to land the plane gently here, this is not a message against anybody. I am just aggressively for the empath taking their journey the way that they need to take it, without interference and without them tripping over their feet, second guessing themselves about what their focus should be on this journey. Some people need to learn empathy. Some people need to learn empathy. Some people need to learn empathy. I'll say that. Some people need to learn self-consideration. Your job, our job, my job is to discern which one you are. Do you need to learn empathy, or do you need to learn self-consideration? Because I need to learn self-consideration. I have learned, am learning self-consideration. And I would argue that the empath needs to learn the self-consideration. But when you hear messages and it strikes a bad note, just know, tap into that discernment. That message is probably not for you. That's not medicine, that's poison. Okay?